Welcome to the Online Success Journey Podcast, your opportunity to discover and learn from entrepreneurs like yourself. This is not your typical podcast, but a place where you can get the real story and find out how real people encounter speed bumps and detours, but journey through to find success. Now here's your host for the Online Success Journey Podcast, Patience.
Hello everyone and welcome to Online Success Journey. This is episode 155. Are you ready to join the clan? Today we have Paul Moore, a commercial real estate investor, author of The Perfect Investment, and co-hosts a wealth building podcast called How to Lose Money. Hello, Paul.
Hey everyone, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me on, Patience. It's a real honor.
Thank you for coming. I know the clan is anxious to hear your story, so let's get started with the basics. Can you tell my clan a little bit about your background, about what you did before you started your real estate investment?
So I grew up really misguided. I wanted to be a parapsychologist all the way through high school. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's someone who's chasing ghosts and paranormal and supernatural type stuff. So I always had an interest in that type of stuff, and I still do, but it's in a very different way now. But I got to my senior year of high school and I found out there was no college that had a major in parapsychology, even if the Ghostbusters movie said differently. So I made my first mistake. I went to engineering school, the extreme opposite, and I got a degree in petroleum engineering. Then I went on and got an MBA from the Ohio State University. I went to Ford Motor Company where I worked for about 5 years. I loved Ford, but I always had an itch to do my own thing, to get out of the 9 to 5 and get into something that turned into more like 7 to 11. And I'm talking about 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. for the most part. But that's another story. So I started my own staffing firm in Detroit, Michigan, near Ford Motor Company with a partner. And we did that for about 5 years. I was fortunate enough to be finalist for Michigan Entrepreneur of the Year twice in a row during that time. Then we sold our company to a publicly traded firm, and that was in 1997. And so I didn't know what to do. Being semi-retired, so-called, in your mid-30s sounds exciting, Patience, but honestly, it was kind of miserable. So we bought 120 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. We moved to the top of a mountain, and we actually had some friends join us, and I started a nonprofit organization to reach out to international students studying in the United States and give them a farm experience. They could come and ride a cow and milk a goat or vice versa, and go fishing in a pond, take hikes on trails, and did that for a year or two. Got really bored, to be honest, because we didn't have that many events, and I didn't know what to do day in and day out. So that's when I started flipping houses, and that's when I got into real estate, and that was around 2000. And I've done about a dozen different things in real estate since 2000 to now.
What a journey from the farm to being bored. I think it's nice to be bored and you are retired and your own boss, eh? Wow.
I was a high energy entrepreneur and I really wanted to do something. So my friend and I started flipping houses, and I've been on a very long real estate journey since then.
Okay. What is the most dangerous belief an investor can have?
I think the most dangerous belief an investor can have is mixing up speculation with true investing. Now, for years, Patience, I thought I was investing. I was really speculating, or actually even gambling. And here's the difference. Investing is when the principal is safe and you might make a return on your investment. But gambling is when the principal is not safe and you have a chance to make a return on your investment. And for years, I told people I was investing in things. I was really speculating or gambling. And like the time I invested in a wireless internet company in North Dakota. And we thought we were going to make a huge profit. But, honestly, the principal was not safe and we lost that. Or another time I invested in an oil and gas deal, and my friends and I dumped hundreds of thousands of dollars down a hole in the ground trying to drill for oil. And it was a sure thing, of course, and we were going to make 10 or 20 times our money back. But we actually never got that principal back. And that was gambling. So I've learned the difference, and I think that's one of the most important things investors need to learn. Paul Samuelson is the first United States Nobel Prize winner in economics, and he said, investing should be more like watching paint dry or watching grass grow. If you want excitement, go to Las Vegas with $800 in your pocket.
Okay. Why do you do what you do?
Well, I have a big why now. I don't know how much you've heard, Patience, about human trafficking. It's gotten pretty widely known the last few years. But if you take the record profits, Starbucks, General Motors, Apple, and Nike combined, the record profits, double that number, and that's the approximate amount of revenue they believe is generated by human trafficking every year. This is modern day slavery. And if I was alive back in the 1850s, I want to believe, if I was in the United States in the 1850s, or if I was in England in the around 1800, I want to believe I would be fighting slavery, fighting against it. And if I was alive in the United States in the 1960s, I would have been, wanting to stand up for civil rights. Well, we have a civil rights and a slavery emergency on our hands right now. It's a worldwide epidemic. There's between 21 and 30 million people being trafficked right now. There's 2 million a year, approximately more, being trafficked. It's got to stop. So the why for me is I'm working with some people who are trying to fight against human trafficking and rescue its victims. And so that's what I want to do. I want to pour $1 billion or more through my influence, relationships, and my own income into fighting human trafficking in the rest of my life.
Let's put men aside because you've been retired and successful for a long time. How did you know you are really successful?
I think true success is when you're really, really at peace with yourself and you have true happiness. There's a guy who's 108 years old, and they asked him how, his secret to long life. And he said it was happiness. He had real joy and peace within himself. This guy eats like a quart of ice cream every day, which would defy a lot of health logic. But he said, the ice cream makes me happy. And so I think that when you're truly successful, you know that because you know why you were created and you're doing what you were created to do. And this brings a lot of happiness. I believe we were all designed intentionally with a purpose on this earth. There's about 8 billion different purposes in the world right now. And unfortunately, most people don't know what or how to even find out what that is. But if you learn what it is and you're doing it, I think that brings tremendous joy, peace, happiness, and success.
What have you learned from business as an investor?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I learned the difference between investing and speculating. And that was a great thing to learn. Another thing I learned is how important it is not to be needy. I've learned that in my personal relationships. I've been married 31 years. And as a man, they say, experts say that about 70 to 80% of men are actually needy. They're looking for their wife or their kids or their business cohorts or whoever to fill some deep need in them, to be recognized or to be important, or to fulfill some, deep sadness that they had as a kid. But it's really, really important that we recognize this in our marriage, but also in business, that we do not act needy. Here's a little analogy. If you were up, and it's kind of a silly analogy, but hopefully it makes sense. If you were way up north in Canada and you had to survive, you could learn to be a spear fisherman. You could learn to throw spears into a dark lake, hopefully hitting a fish. You're hoping that the spear is sharp enough. You're hoping that the fish comes along at the right time before you get hungry and starve. You're hoping that the fish doesn't take a left or a right turn and you miss it. Or you have another option, and this is where it gets kind of silly. You can become a grizzly bear. Now, grizzly bears, if you've seen the picture, Patience, they stand in the waterfalls with their mouth wide open, and they allow fish to jump into their mouth. And that is the picture of a non-needy business person, or a non-needy person who raises capital for investments, which is what I do. I raise money for commercial real estate deals. And a grizzly bear, the picture of a grizzly bear is someone who is actually a thought leader, someone who has maybe a podcast like you do, or a blog, or is someone who people come to for advice and they come asking, hey, how can I join you? How can I help you be successful? Rather than someone who's out there needily trying to ask people, will you invest with me? Will you help me? It's a big difference. And people can read that when they talk to you or when they read, your emails. And that is critical. I've learned that in business and in life, it's important not to be needy.
Okay, you have a podcast. Why did you call your podcast How to Lose Money? We want to keep money. And now you go and say you want to lose money. Who's coming? I want to keep it.
Yeah, right. Well, it's for a couple different reasons. First of all, we looked around the podcast world and saw that there were a lot of people who were trumpeting their success, and that's great. I applaud those people, and I want to be on their podcast. But what we found is there's not a lot of people who are focusing on their failures. What did you do wrong? Tim Ferriss has a book out now where he's interviewed some of the top people in the business world, and he always asks them, tell us about your failures. Tell us what you did wrong. What did you learn from that? We thought it'd be great to have a podcast where that's all we focused on. So we interview successful business leaders, investors, etc., and we ask them, how did you lose money? How did you lose time? How did you lose relationships? Tell us how you lost a business. And almost all those folks are really happy to tell us. And then we ask them what lessons they learned so our listeners don't repeat those lessons. So the podcast is called How to Lose Money. And the truth of that is we're hoping people will learn how not to lose money.
You said you become rich as to rags, back to story. How did you go from 1.5 million in the bank to 2.5 million in debt and back to debt-free 30 months later? What was your secret?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, my story, I believe you're in London, and my story involves an Englishman, actually a German, who lived in England in the 1800s. What happened is in 1997, we sold our company, and we sold it for about $2.9 million, and I ended up with about $1.5 million in the bank in 1998. Then I started investing in real estate. We started flipping homes. We flipped 50 or 60 houses before the Great Recession. And I also flipped a bunch of high-end waterfront lots. I built some homes. I did some other things. And we were holding a lot of real estate, including these high-end waterfront lots and other real estate when the recession hit around 2008. So I found myself with a partner with $2.5 million in debt. And my partner, after quite a while, said, I can't do this anymore. I can't make these payments. I have to leave. So after a month or two, he left. In January 2008, I found myself with the full brunt and the full interest of $2.5 million in debt. And I asked myself, I was actually meditating one morning, and I thought of George Mueller. Now, I don't know if you know who George Mueller is, but he moved from Germany in 1820s, I think, to England. And he actually moved just a little bit west of where you are, Patience, into Bristol, England. And he started opening orphanages, and he wanted to care for orphans. And he ended up caring for about 10,000 orphans in his life. But he never asked for a penny. He made a very detailed record of every penny, every dime he ever got. And it all came because he basically trusted that if he had a great need, he believed that God would come through and meet his need and provide everything he needed. And he actually cared for 10,000 orphans. So I thought to myself, what would George Mueller do if he was in my situation? Well, first of all, he wouldn't have been in debt at all. But if he was, I think what he would have done is he would have began generously and lavishly giving to causes he cared about and trusting that he would get out of debt that way. So I called my family together January 1st of 2008, and I said, hey, we're going to give our way out of debt. And it may not work. We might end up bankrupt, but that's going to happen anyway if something doesn't change. So we said, okay, we're going to act like we're going to pretend we're making $500,000 a year, and we're going to start giving generously like we had that much money coming in, and we're going to see what happens. Well, Patience, 4 weeks later, after we were giving a fairly painful amount every week, 4 weeks later, I met a guy at a restaurant, and he was a real estate developer, and I told him about one of the projects I was working on that was completely stalled. And it was the key to getting out of a lot of the debt if it worked. And it was keeping us in debt because it wouldn't work. And he just made an offhanded comment, and a light bulb went off in my mind. 2 days later, I was sitting in front of the county planning and zoning commissioner trying to get a rule changed. And I was using their rules to say, look at this rule. If you read it another way, it could mean this. And the lady couldn't believe I had come up with this. And she said, yeah, you're right. That rule needs to change. But I guess you can do what you want to do. And so it allowed me to subdivide 5 acres into 5 1-acre waterfront parcels. And I sold those lots off. And 13 months later, there was still a lot of prayer, a lot of pain, a lot of giving, and a lot of, it was high risk. But 13 months later, we were completely debt free.
What a journey. Wow, it worked for you. Do you think it can work for anyone out there who's in debt and want to really get out of it?
It's more blessed to give than receive. And I believe there's a universal principle of giving that when we give, we will receive back more than we give. But I want to be clear. I don't think this is an all-time, once and for all formula. I don't believe it'll work automatically. I think you need to discern your situation. And I believe it's important to know whether this is the right path for you. I felt that in my time of meditation that I realized this is what I was supposed to do, and I felt directed divinely to do it. But I don't think it's automatically going to work for everybody in all times.
Okay, tell us the secrets used by the super wealthy to attain and maintain their wealth over generations and why you are not invited to their party.
Well, if you look at the super wealthy, whether they got wealthy through technology or whether they inherited money or whether they got wealthy in some other way, you'll see that almost all of them own commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is very difficult to get into, and one of the reasons is the super wealthy hold a whole lot of it, and they're not giving it up. A lot of the super wealthy say they would never give up their commercial real estate. Warren Buffett was asked, what's your ideal holding time for something you own? And he said, ideal holding time is forever. And a lot of the super wealthy feel that way about their commercial real estate. But the reason the general public is not invited to their party, there's a lot of reasons. Number one, it takes a really high net worth to qualify for debt to purchase or to actually have the money to purchase typical commercial real estate. A lot of people have to be, you might have to have millions of dollars of net worth and even up to $500,000 or $1 million of liquidity just to qualify for a loan. Number two, lenders want people to actually have experience. Wow. They want them to actually know what they're doing. They want to know that this loan's going to get paid back. Number three, brokers, commercial real estate brokers, do not play by the same rules that U.S. residential realtors play by. Commercial brokers do not have to present any offer they don't want to the seller, and they present only the offers from people they really, really believe will put gas in their BMW and food on their table. So they only present the offers from people they like, know, and trust, people who will close deals. And if you are trying to get into commercial real estate and you're trying to get the attention of a broker, you better have some really good story to tell or some experience or whatever to get in front of a broker. And next, like I said before, you need the experience, you need the liquidity, you need the high net worth, you need to find the right deals and be able to beat out others who probably have a greater inside track if they're already in the business. And that's the biggest problem with commercial real estate right now. It's so popular in the U.S., especially apartments. It's so hard to find an apartment because people who are already in the business are bidding the price of these apartments up through the roof. And somebody who's really smart knows that these are overpriced in many cases and won't buy. So there's tremendous competition right now. That will change someday, patience. Interest rates are rising and the market will loosen up. But for right now, where we are in this team, it's very difficult to find a good commercial apartment, self-storage, mobile home park, retail, industrial, or warehouse project in the United States. But It is possible. It's just really tough.
What is one thing that has contributed to your success?
Well, there's a lot of things. One thing that I already mentioned was giving in advance, giving in advance of the return. Another thing is I've finally realized the difference between risk, the risk and return. A lot of people think that higher risk leads to higher return. It's not true. It's this: low risk leads to low return. Higher risk leads to higher potential return, but it's also higher potential loss. And so, like I said earlier about gambling, knowing the difference between something that's really gambling and something that's really an investment is critical. And that's one of the things that's contributed to my success. Another thing is learning from failures. And that's why we do the How to Lose Money podcast, because we want to learn from our failures and others, not just our success. If I'm sitting in an airport, well, let's say I hear a story about somebody sitting in an airport and they've got a great invention idea and they're sitting there waiting to get on the plane and they're talking to a guy, and the guy says, hey, I want to invest $1 million in your project. And the guy sends him a check for $1 million and they both get rich, and it's a great story. Well, how do I go out and replicate that, Patience? What do I do? Do I go sit in airports waiting for millionaires to sit next to me? That doesn't work. But if I hear someone's failure story, if I hear what they learned from it and where they went wrong, sometimes I find it easier to not replicate the failure than I could to fall into the success that they fell into. So that's a big key to success in business, I think.
Let's talk about your book, The Perfect Investor.
So I was researching after building a multifamily quasi hotel in North Dakota years ago and operating that for a couple of years. Got into a Hyatt hotel, was part of building that. And then I decided I really wanted to go back to commercial multifamily. When I did that, I realized I wanted to not take the risks of a developer. Again, I was going for low risk. And I was about 50 years old, and I thought, well, I don't want to take these high risks anymore. I don't want to swing for the fences. I don't want to try to keep hitting home runs, and when I strike out, end up with nothing. So I decided, hey, I want to hit singles and doubles. So I went to research the multifamily field, and I got a mentor, and I actually learned a lot. I spent about a year studying commercial multifamily, and at the end of that year, before we even bought our first Class B, that means, 20, 30, 40-year-old apartments. Before we bought any, I actually knew enough and I researched enough and I had enough data compiled to make a whole bunch of special reports. And I thought, wait a minute, I might as well just turn this into a book. So I wrote a book called The Perfect Investment, and it's about investing in apartments. And the book goes over some of the advantages and the demographic trends that make commercial multifamily investing so good. One of the things that is so great about multifamily investing is there's a long-term trend in the U.S. of home ownership that was in the low 60s, maybe 60 to 65% for many years. Well, the government tinkered with the rules, and the home ownership skyrocketed to above 69%. By the year 2005. But a lot of those people, they could just fog a mirror and they could get a loan, and they were taking out loans on houses that they had no business taking out. I had a friend who was making about $40,000 a year, and he bought a $600,000 second home, and he had no way of paying that mortgage, and he lost it back to the bank soon. But a lot of people lost their jobs in the downturn, and between 2005 and 2015, home ownership dropped like a rock, back from 69.2% down to 63% again. Every percent represented 1 million new renters in the renter pool. But a lot of apartments weren't being built during that time. And so there was a huge demand for apartments starting in the middle of the recession, and it just continues to today. Now, 3 reasons that this is not just a bubble, it's a long-term trend are these. Number one, baby boomers, people born between 1946 and 1966 approximately, are now becoming the fastest growing group of renters. And statistics say when they start renting, they'll never own a home again. Second, millennials, which is, there's 77 million baby boomers in the United States. There's about 80 million millennials, and they generally prefer or need to rent versus buy. They don't see why they need to get tied down to a 30-year contract on a seemingly overpriced home. And they want the flexibility of being able to move across town or across the country for a new job, new friends, new excitement next year. And so they don't see the point in owning typically. And a lot of them have very high student debt, which means they couldn't own if they wanted to. The third reason for the increased trend for rentals is that immigration is continuing to play a very significant role in the U.S. population. And the immigrant population is growing at a much, much faster rate than the general population of the U.S. And by and large, they typically rent for a long time, much longer than Americans in general, than Native Americans, I should say, or people who were born in America originally. And so they tend to rent more than buy. And these three trends are causing us to be able to look way down the road and say, hey, apartment rentals are going to be hot for a very long time to come. And if you look at Germany, patients, the home ownership rate is down in the low to mid 40s. Well, we're still at 63% or so. If we're going to end up like Germany, then it's very likely that rental real estate will be booming for a long, long time to come. And that's why I call it the perfect investment, because the risk and return ratio is very strong. There's something called the Sharpe ratio. That's SHARPE, and that measures the return in different asset classes versus the risk. And multifamily and self-storage units are by far the highest return versus risk profile for any asset class from the 1970s through the early 2000s, and it continues today to be very strong.
Where do we find this book and how can we get in connect with you?
So the book is called The Perfect Investment, Create Enduring Wealth from the Historic Shift to Multifamily Housing. But you can look up The Perfect Investment by Paul Moore, and it's on Amazon, and you can find the book there, or you can get in touch with me through my website, wellingscapital.com. That's WELLINGS capital.com. You can order the book there as well. And we would love to hear from any of your listeners. Of course, we'd also love to hear from people at our podcast, How to Lose Money.
Okay, thank you. So, Clan, there will be more from Paul in a moment. If you are listening on one of the many podcast platforms rather than my website and you are encouraged by Paul's journey, go to onlinesuccessjourney.com for a bonus portion of the interview. The Online Success Journey is a wonderful membership community built for people searching for the path to success. We are one big clan and you can be part of this community for free. Once you have joined the clan, click on part of Paul's journey or over other 100 journeys that are available and learn how you can find the right path for your own online success journey. That's a wrap, clan. Remember, success is a journey. Patience and Paul.
This is not the end of the journey. We hope you've enjoyed listening to part 1 and want to be sure you know there is a second part to this and every journey podcast at onlinesuccessjourney.com, filled with even more success tips, uplifting stories, and even a bit of fun. There are dozens of episodes only available to the members of the Online Success Journey clan. Check out the website and click on Join the Clan for more information. Patience would like to thank you for listening to this podcast, and she has a free audio gift for you at her website. Go to onlinesuccessjourney.com for instant access to this gift. Of course, you know that listening to the journeys of others helps each of us chart our own path. So make sure you're subscribed to be notified as each new interview is posted. There are so many ways to stay connected to the Online Success Journey and to listen in. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we appreciate your help in telling others. One of the best ways to share the benefit you get is to rate and review it at Stitcher and other sites by clicking the stars or completing the ratings form. by clicking thumbs up and leaving a comment on YouTube or liking and sharing the podcast on social media. To review the podcast within iTunes, simply open iTunes to the podcast, click on Ratings and Reviews, then write a review. On behalf of patients and until next time, thanks once more for listening. It is our hope that this podcast will guide you on your own online success journey.